Hi folks, with Tacitus today, Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining us audio, radio, no pictures, live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about, and using, if you like, the launchpad to this, the novel from Somerset Maugham of Human Bondage, which was, well, written over 100 years ago now. He's an English author. And by the way, this novel of Human Bondage was, I think it's still on the list of the 100 greatest novels of all time. So it's up there with the best. There was a time sort of years ago where it was compulsory reading for those who fancied themselves as being men of letters or pursuing any sort of literary based type education. Now it's very much a book of its time, I suppose, but the messages that it has in there, I think, are relevant. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, the quick bit. Somerset Maugham had quite a bad stammer. His folks died when he was young, and he went to live, I think, with his father's brother, his uncle, in southern England or south east England, and they weren't his parents. He had this stammer, and then he was sent to boarding school and was bullied horribly, and because of his stammer. But he later on became a very successful playwright. Out of all things, studied to be a doctor, became a playwright. Did very well out of it. Was initially was dabbled in sort of bisexual stuff, then became heterosexual, then became bisexual again, then went full on gay, and then became certainly, if we're to believe some of the history, sort of engaged in pedophilia. But anyway, whatever his shortcomings, and he had them. His literary works live on. For example, the novel Moon and Sixpence of Human Bondage, and other works, some of which, quite a few, which actually have been, The Razor's Edge, and the movie Rain, and a series of short stories, and so on. For those who appreciate, fine prose and so on, then Somerset Maugham certainly had that, and again, there just the opening few pages of the Moon and Sixpence would be in support of that. I think any writer, myself included, I wish I could write like that. Anyway, what was Maugham on about? Now, he had a stammer. He changed the character, and of Human Bondage was sort of to some extent autobiographical. He changed the stammer to being a club foot, and that he was again bullied and almost tortured, as he would sort of describe it, in boarding school because of his handicap. He kept the stammer even into old age, and he was able to. If you look at the interviews from, say, the late 1940s, early 1950s, that sort of time, he died. I think he was like in his 90s when he died. And he died in the 1960s. And they would have to, it would be an all-day gig to try and get enough footage in the interview where he wasn't stammering. So he was able to get it out after a while, but he took umbrage with people that tried to finish the word or the sentence for him. But he got some very heavyweight sort of people. He had the likes of the Winston Churchills and all that sort of coming to stay at his villa, which was quite luxurious, in Cape Ferrat, which is in southern France. I think he died there. But let's look at the wider issue. The point that, among a number of points that Somerset Maugham was making, is that can you be truly free? And this is borrowing, if you like, from Spinoza. Can you be truly free if your emotions are caught up or held hostage by perceived restrictions? Are these restrictions, limitations, these chains that bind you, are they real or are they imagined? Now, if they're real, what can you do to overcome them? And if they're imagined, then you become simply a hostage to your worst fears rather than being limited by any reality. Now, whether these fears are sort of find a basis in spite or envy or trying to seek advantage of others, or in this day and age, professional victimhood, it doesn't really matter, but they're either actual or purported restrictions. For example, the university students that go waving placards about climate change. Oh, we're all going to die. We're all going to die. We have to do something. Or black and brown people that come to the West illegally and then insist on having very, very special accommodations and arrangements and handouts made for them. And if they don't get it, then they are victims, the most horribly oppressed victims imaginable, and Hitlers lurk everywhere. Now, this is, of course, all in the imagination of the people. You don't have to come here. No one made you, and this is so. Why don't you? If it's that bad, why don't you go back to where you came from? And if you have any real legitimate complaints, everyone's racist to me, white people, Nazi, fascist, Hitler. Then that's hardly a position to, and it's very emotional and very imagined, very created, very invented. Now, Marxism rests heavily on inventing the demons rather than having them there. The counter-revolutionaries are everywhere, enemies of the people, but these are all inventions. They don't actually exist, or certainly not to anywhere near the extent or in the way that the propagandists would assert. So Maughams, talking about his stammer, created the illusion of a restriction, but actually he was a hugely successful writer, first as a playwright. I mean, there are times when he had 3 or 4 plays running simultaneously, concurrently in the London West End, and he became quite wealthy out of writing plays and being a playwright, a successful playwright. He then decided to get into novels and did equally well there. Human Bondage and The Moon and Sixpence, The Razor's Edge sold very well. He was even employed. His writing was employed to write up propaganda for the British government during World War II. And he also did things like he volunteered for to work as an ambulance driver or ambulance officer, I'm not sure which, in France during World War I, rescuing injured soldiers and so on. That's where he met someone else there, an American, young American man, and they ended up having a long-term homosexual relationship that they consummated after the war in Maughams Villa in France. But he was able to write, and this meant that he was hugely successful in a literary sense, hugely successful in his life, and was able to overcome the stammer. So was the stammer the source of all his problems, his restrictions, the chains that bound him, or was he able to transcend that through his writing and again, become very successful? So at the end of the stammer didn't really hold him back. It can't have been a pleasant factor, and it would have obviously been difficult for him at boarding school, but he survived that and managed and came through again as quite successful. So this idea of when you're hostage to your emotions and hostage to your wildest, worst fears type imagination, then you become paralyzed, and you either seek victimhood and compensation for what is an imaginary sort of disaster that's always just around the corner, or you can try and transcend that and realize it in the sense of reality, realize that these things are as much, if not more, in your imagination than they are any realistic restriction or anything that prevents you from doing the best you can. Now, Maughams was quite a high IQ dude and was a good writer, so he had that on his side. Now, if somebody, for example, had a stammer or a clubfoot and they were low IQ and had no other abilities or special abilities or anything like that, then they would be restricted. But would they be restricted because they're low IQ with no special abilities, or would they be restricted because of their stammer or their clubfoot? Which would it be? And if we say, well, it must be just because of the clubfoot, then the only place you can go is handouts and victimhood types, rather than saying, well, look, this person's only got an IQ of 80. It doesn't matter they got a club foot or not. They're not going to be able to do anything. They already have a situation that's restrictive in the overall sense. But we should have a society that makes them as equal as somebody with an IQ of 5 million. Well, no, that's not how the world will ever work. And to say that, should they receive some sort of state assistance? Okay, sure. No one's arguing that. But are they surrounded by evil Hitlers everywhere just because they have an IQ of 80? Well, no. So one doesn't necessarily beget, in fact, rarely begets the other. So this was this, now Spinoza mentioning it, which was now hundreds of years ago. Oh, it must have been, what, 300 years ago? Spinoza mentioned that, which is referenced indirectly in Of Human Bondage, is that as long as we're hostage to our emotions and worst fears, we can never truly be free. And so freedom isn't the well, I can move to a rich country and get lots of handouts. That's not freedom. Freedom is the ability to not be hostage to your worst fears. Now, you can see this in a number of ways. There's I'm thinking of one now, a lady I used to work with. She used to change boyfriends as often as I changed my underwear, for goodness sakes. She seemed to be going through them at a rapid rate. But she always had this morbid fear that whichever guy she was dating was about to leave her and dump her. She just had this morbid fear. It was always about to happen. And now she was, my age at times, early 20s. And I asked her, we were sitting down having a cup of coffee one day, and we were colleagues. And so, what do you mean? I mean, why you? Even as a young guy, I could see the deep flaws. But it might happen. It's my worst fear that it will happen. Therefore, because I'm so afraid of it happening, I'm going to dump him first before he dumps me. But whoa, stop. How do you know he's going to dump you? I mean, if there is some area of the relationship it's maybe not working out, to try and talk about it. So, well, maybe you can adjust your behaviour in some way. Maybe there's something quite minor. Maybe this is not a big deal. If you talk about it, then surely there's, at least if you're talking about it, there's a chance that you're going to sort it out, or it's a better chance. Oh no, but he might do it. It's my worst fear. I'm afraid of Hitler. And so their worst fears are driving and dominating really their thoughts, and causing them to take action that they otherwise wouldn't take, and action that's ultimately harmful to their cause. So the very thing they're trying to avoid and prevent is what they're actively bringing about. And so she was certainly in that case. Now, you could argue the same thing about the Jewish diaspora. The Jewish teachings, the Jewish schools, and the Jewish literature promotes this idea that there's going to be a new Hitler appearing sort of every 5 minutes, and there's another Hitler always just around the corner, or under the bed, or in the closet, or wherever. And this drives them, the Jewish diaspora, this drives them to thinking that the slightest sign that Hitler may be around the next corner means they have to jump all over it, do crescendo levels of propaganda, hysterical fucking outcries, and attempts to stack the deck and mark the cards and thing, because we're allowed to do it because Hitler is around the corner. Now, whether Hitler is or isn't around the corner isn't the point, but so people deciding that they want to elect their own sovereign government is Hitler. And if somebody's thirsty and wants to drink water, well, Hitler drank water. Hitler drank water when he was thirsty. And you're drinking water, that means you're Hitler. And so the slightest sort of smidgen of a thing that they can relate or tie into, that another Hitlers are coming along, then they have a hysterical sort of meltdown. And you see this in, well, any restriction to mass immigration is the same as when we couldn't emigrate from Germany and Europe when we wanted to in the 1930s, which is the same as Hitler. And this means another Hitler's coming along if you want to even restrict. And if you want to restrict migration to skilled migration, then again, that means that the Jews from the 1930s that say only had the experience in running like a delicatessen shop or something, Einstein was all right. He could get a visa to go anywhere, but everyone else, which was approximately half the Jews in Germany at the time, they struggled to get visas during a time of mass unemployment and the Great Depression, that should be realised, but nonetheless. So any restriction to skilled migration is Hitler! And so if you have popular elections, it's Hitler. If you have any restriction to mass migration, even restriction to skilled, that's Hitler. Hitler is just around the corner, and under the bed and in the closet. So a lot of the globalist things that are being argued for today, or pushed or imposed upon us, such as the mass migration, such as stacked courts, and because it's okay if you stack a jury or rig an election, if you're stopping Hitler, that's okay. I mean, you're allowed to do that. Is it dishonest? Well, not really. Dishonest if you do it to us, but it's not dishonest if we do it to them. It's okay when we do it. So this is very much, I think, an of human bondage type scenario where, traumatized though they may be, even if we go back to the mid-1800s, Jewish cataloguers in everywhere from Romania to France to Britain to wherever were studiously and with much focus and determination cataloguing every slight or every what they would perceive as anti-Jewish or unfavourable to the Jewish diaspora behaviour of local governments or regional governments or whatever. And they were very studious in cataloguing all this. So it's been a mindset that's been around for quite a while. It's not something that happened only in the 1930s. It was going on well before that. Now, one could argue about the justification or lack of for any of this cataloguing, but it's the idea of nursing these hurts and keeping them as open, trembling wounds is very much part of the Jewish diaspora. So that this idea of, well, popular government means Hitler is something they'll jump over pretty quickly. So if we go back to now the human bondage, this is something that's a figment of the imagination. So it's a paranoid hysteria that bears no resemblance to any reality. If you look at the very, very unique circumstance and conditions of Central Europe during that time, then they would all need to be replicated in order for something like that to reoccur. And given the dynamics are very much part of that time and that era of history, the idea that it could reoccur, or when someone drinks water, that means that Hitler, that's absurd and quite ridiculous. But it is an extension of an imaginary belief that's couched in emotional hysteria, which is what Maugham was talking about, or part of things that Maugham was talking about in that semi-autobiographical novel. But look, that's my take on it. Give me your opinion. I'd like to see it below. Maybe I'm off track. Maybe I'm close to the bone on this. But let me know in the comments. And you've been fantastic today, and thank you for listening.